Welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed a nice cup of coffee. We'll start with the second panel on delivering innovation capabilities for the European railway of the future. And your moderator for this session will be Keir Fitch, Head of Unit of Rail Safety and Interoperability of DG Move. Keir, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Indra, and it's a great pleasure to join you for this second session of Innovation Days for Shift2Rail. In our first opening session this morning, you heard from my Director General, Henrik Hollerlei, together with Carla Borghini, the Director of Shift2Rail, and Libor Lochman, the CER Director General, about the overall vision for rail for the future, how we make it happen. And of course, now we need to start the deeper dive into what that means in terms of the technologies that we need to develop, in terms of the trends that we need to be aware of, and in terms of actually how we get the industry together to deliver on all of this. So joining me, I hope, for what should be a very exciting panel, I would like to welcome Eric Mink, who is the Programme Manager for Mobility as a Service at the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management. Eric, I hope you're coming up on the screen. Then we have Jorge Vieira, who is the founder and principal consultant of MTA Mobile Ticketing and Applications. Yeah, we have Eric, I believe. That's good news. We have Yves Paral from Thales, who is a coordinator for us in Shift2Rail for what we call IP4, all of the work on ticketing and passenger data services. Okay, I'm being told that the technology is not working at all. Okay, right. So it seems that we are not managing to get our panelists to link up. In that case, we will have a change of plan. And I believe that Indra will join me back on stage. I see the faces of the panelists, so I don't know if this...
I think here I come with you. I think we have some of the panelists, but not all of them, ladies and gentlemen, due to connectivity once again. But I think you could ask some questions to them, and otherwise we will join you on stage again.
Yep.
Okay. I give you the floor back.
Well, I've seen Eric. I don't see Yves, Jorge, or, and is that Norbert? That's Roland. Norbert, okay. So I do see Norbert Karl, who is our IP5, so our freight coordinator. He's from DB Cargo, but he works with Shift2Rail, coordinating the freight program as well. So I hope we will at least be able to bring Roland and Eric into some of the discussions later. But just let me set the scene. Of course, as I say, we've discussed the big picture in the first session. What we wanted to do in this session was look at how we deliver that. And in particular, there is, of course, an issue of getting the right staff into the railways, into the rail supply industry, to actually manage what will be a very, very different railway in the future. So one of my questions for the panelists will be actually how do we attract the right people to the railways? And here I can do a little advertising pitch as well, because of course the Commission will be launching, together with our partners in the railway industry, so together with the Community of European Railways and together with UNIFE, the rail supply industry, a project in January, what we call a skills blueprint for rail. So that will also be a chance to work across the sector, seeing how we develop the skills that we need for the railway of the future.
Okay, Keir. How we are going to attract the right people? We are going to discuss it. I suggest we do it together. You can have a seat there, please. And then I will call upon stage once again. Carlo, can I ask for your cooperation once again? You can have a seat there. And Libor, may I ask you kindly to come and join us once again? So I'm sure we will have a very nice conversation. So go ahead, Keir, because you had one question, how to attract those right people? That was one of your questions.
Yeah, well, I mean, the question as I was posing is, we need, if we're to run a digital railway in the future, the people who have the IT skills to actually leverage all the technology. But we also need to have the people who will bring make the rail system attractive for end users, particularly for passengers, because clearly, as I'm sure we'll discuss a bit later in this talk, we are trying to compete with the other sectors to bring people to rail. So we need the passenger-facing people who will address that. So as I said, we will start this project in January, working with the industry to assess the skills that are needed to bring people in. But I think that, this is particularly actually a question for Libor.
Okay,
How do you, Libor, see the skills needs of both the railway supply industry and the railways of the future? And what are you expecting that we will get out of the skills blueprint in terms of addressing those issues?
Thank you for that, because I mentioned, in fact, the blueprint in our previous session, so that the cooperation with the industry as an essential tool for really having the skilled workforce from the perspective of the technology innovation that we need to engage in the railway system, both from the manufacturer side as well as from the side of the operating community. So what we expect from that is clearly that it will help us not only to have the research program that we need for the deployment of the technology, but also the workforce that will help us to operate that and to develop it, of course, at the same time. Now, how are we going to do that? You know that the blueprint is involving not only the manufacturers and the operating part together with, I would say, observatory of the European Federation of the Trade Unions, but we have universities connected to that. In fact, the leading element in this structure, or the overarching element, is the university, because we need to work with them in a way, how can we develop the whole scheme for the development of the future skills. So universities play a crucial role in it.
Yeah. What's your opinion on it?
No, I think Libero pointed out something really important, and I think we need to start as soon as possible to create an opportunity to join the rail sector. Eric said before, we need to make rail cool. I think is a clear message that we need to be used.
It's a really good base.
But
yes.
I think also there are two aspects I think is important. The first one, we need to make use of the extensive and great knowledge of the staff working in the railway undertakings and in the supply chain.
But perhaps you can connect it, as he said, the knowledge that is there, that people have, together with the universities.
Yes, and I think this is exactly where we need to make, because we cannot simply lose this knowledge. This knowledge is essential, is today the knowledge that allows the rail system to go on and operate. The question is that if more and more we introduce the digitalization, automation, we clearly create a new market for which we need the new skills, whatever they will be, and we need to start to explain this as soon as possible, because otherwise we'll not have the new generation of engineers to be interested to work with us on these type of things. And the European Union of Rail can be a great opportunity to as Enrico said, on hackathon, on any other instruments we can use to leverage on this. So I think that we have a series of action that we can take on board together. And I have to say, honestly, in the Shift2Rail program, we were able to fund the 3 PhD only, to be clear. So meaning that also from our side, we need to rethink what does it mean to fund exploratory research, how we can create this community. And we need to learn from the other sector. If we take the automotive industry, today you have a pure digital company going to collaborate with their competitor to create the new skills. Because it's not in the automotive industry, the skills is coming from outside.
So you have to work together,
yes.
No concurrency. How do you look at it, Kier?
Well, very much like Carla. I mean, as I said, we need a very different skill set,
Yes.
but we need to give clear messages, particularly to the young people who are training today.
But not only to the youngsters, I understood from Carlo. You have to cooperate and bring those two skills from the people who are there and the new young ones together. How do you see that?
Well, I mean, rail is a very old, in some ways, industry, a very conservative
well, we
industry.
Have to make it cool again,
so we have to make it cool, and that's really about getting the existing staff to see that there is a value in what they've learned, that their industry actually has a great future. So giving them the enthusiasm to then work with the youngsters, and I think we do need youngsters because the rail industry staff is quite old. So we bring the newcomers in and allow the existing staff to really feel that they're leveraging their skills and experience in bringing the newcomers up to speed.
So working together with the youngsters and the older people who are there already, but also cooperating and working together with other industries, which is very important.
Yeah, and I mean, this is something that we are aiming to do very much across the new work programme, because of course we can't invent all the technologies we need in Shift2Rail or whatever the new partnership's called. We need to leverage the work that's coming out of the telecoms industry, out of high-performance computing, but also out of a lot of socioeconomic work, actually understanding what people really want from their transport system.
Is that possible? How do you look at it? Because is that possible? There are a lot of walls between all the different companies, all the different ways of thinking and looking at it. Is that possible? Can we manage to do that?
It must be possible. I mean, if you want to be, and this brings me back, to the beginning of this morning session. We have to be more competitive.
We have no choice. We have to
exactly.
Do it
We have to be
way.
more competitive. We have to be competitive. I mean, on the transportation market, and at the same time, we have to be seen as a reliable partner in the multimodal context. So how can we do it otherwise than really, I would say breaking those, what you call walls, although I would not be convinced that we have that many walls, but because we have the same interest. We have the interest to be attractive for the customers. And that brings us, to the point where we have to work together, and not internally within, the operating community and separate the manufacturing entity and so on. No, all together. And that's why, again, this blueprint is an excellent example. How can we really engage?
Yeah. I think Mr. Mink is joining us online. Mr. Mink, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning. I think Keir has a question for you as well.
Well, I mean, of course, firstly, perhaps your views on this whole issue of how we actually bring new staff into the railway industry would also be extremely interesting.
Yes. I think it's really important to bring new people to the table. Sorry, I can hear myself echoing now. But we at the Ministry of Transport in the Netherlands are really working to get people from data science and behavioral analysts to the table. Because it's not just about rail anymore, but we are in a global mobility transition where digitalization is crucial. So I agree with my speakers that that new people and new skills are necessary. And well, I'm not that young myself anymore.
Good. We can continue. Carlo. This is not only going about technology. I'm sorry, I'm going to continue here because we have a bad connection. This is not only about technology. We were talking a lot about technology, but it is, of course, a service that you want to give to the people.
Yeah, so this is actually also the topic of this session, is about innovation capabilities. And when we started from the program, effectively, the program was built as a bottom-up program, fortunately strongly driven by a clear multi-annual action plan. But what came up quite, the typical question I received from the CEOs with whom Libor is working mostly was what I found in, what I will find in Shift2Rail? What will be the results of this? And when we look at from this point of view, we thought, okay, all this technology will create new services, will create new capabilities, will deliver to the operating community, to the infrastructure manager railway undertaking, a series of capability that will enable the transformation of the system. And how we have worked together was to put together the innovation program, bring together the different technological demonstrator and look which type of services, when they are together, they can deliver to the results. And it's clearly quite complex to start with a program that is technology-driven and looking at the service afterwards. So this is really has been a quite complex process. Thank you to the, I would say, community of the rail operating community, and thank you to the supply industry. We were able to have this transition and to bring it forward. And thank you to the Commission. We had the correct push to go in this direction. And this became also the basis to introduce more and more the system approach we are looking for in the future.
Yeah. And how can you boost it even more, this rail-centric system, this rail-centric network, because that's what we're going to need. So you have already the cooperation of the Commission and of the workers that you are talking about, but what can we do else? What are the next steps?
Yeah, so what we are trying to bring forward in the next steps is really the concept of system approach, and looking at rail as a complex system into which all the subsystems are influencing the behavior of the other.
Not the individual elements, not only 5G, for instance, it's the whole thing.
Exactly. And try to benefit from all the new technology to maximize the performance. We have a lot of discussion with Libor. We have not yet solved it. Okay.
Tell me about that discussion. You do not agree with him then?
No, it was not about disagreeing, but we have, certain challenges about automatic operations, autonomous operations,
Tell me about the
connectivity.
challenges. What are the challenges?
I mean, for me, if I would go and somewhat, departing from the skills, but still, for me, the major challenge of the railway is to build a system which will be as much automated as possible, because this is what brings us to the efficiency and and competitiveness. Automating the system, and we use the IT technology today and widely, but having the bits and pieces of the IT compared to what should be the system approach to automation are like two completely different universes. And that's why I appreciate this push for having a system approach, because that's precisely what we need. Yeah.
You're nodding, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the system approach is something that we've worked very closely with the whole of the industry on, because it's absolutely vital to the future of rail. The real problem we have with rail is that we can see all the great things that this technology could do in terms of automation, in terms of much higher capacity, etc. But getting from where we are today to where we want to be is very hard, because railway is a very complex thing. You've got to get the technology into most of the railway before it's much use.
And how can we get rid of that barriers that you talk about?
Well, that's what we're working on with the system approach. I mean, what we're looking for the future in particular is to develop a much more modular architecture for railway equipment, which means that instead of essentially replacing a train or spending a huge amount of money replacing most of the equipment on a train, you can just unslot, say, the radio system, you mentioned 5G, slot in the new module that has the new technologies, and it will work, and it doesn't require hundreds of thousands or millions of euros per train to upgrade it.
Yeah.
And I mean, if we get there, that will make a huge difference.
If we get there, what do we need to get there?
Well, we need a common vision on how we get there. We need to...
There is a common vision, I think.
Well, that's what we're developing. I mean, we've got the high-level common vision, but of course, high-level visions are great, but you need to get into the detail. And that's really what we've now started working on. And we do have to align the interests of the manufacturers and of the various different bits of the railway industry, because they're not all the same. Of course, the manufacturers want to sell products to make money, and the railways want a train that they can run for many years.
Of course, and key is, once again, to get all the stakeholders around the table. That's what I understand.
Yeah, this is exactly what is about the logic of the capability, the logic that we embedded in this discussion is the system can advance only if we put all the value chain around the table to make a choice. And I think one of the major changes we expect from the evolution of the system is really to have a strong driver from the operating community, including the urban community as interface to the main line, because we should not come to create a mode of transport in splendid isolation. It doesn't simply work. We need to bring it together with the rest. Logistics is fundamental. There is no alternative.
Of course.
Package doesn't move, so simple like this. But so this is the fundamental component. So we need to have a strong driver from the operating community, as Kira was saying, on the future concept of operation. And as the different approach we have with Libor is, you look at that automated system. I look also of the intelligence in the system itself, and how we combine this. And maybe there are different business models.
Combination,
okay?
Yes.
But this is the first point. The second, we have a strong supply industry today, okay, that should, on one side, bring upon the enabler in the form of innovation capabilities, but on the other side, also be capable to challenge the concept of operation, because technology, research, innovation is exactly there to become a challenge. Otherwise,
of course.
And finally, we have the research community. When Kwan explained before, as a research center, the idea is a research center can bring inside really out of the blue idea, breakthrough ideas, independently from rail, aviation, automotive, or energy networks. And if we combine together, and this is the objective of the Shift2Rail now and more in the future, all these forces, I think we can really design a future system, not technologically driven, but as Kira was saying, based on the type of operation the operating community want to have, which is the business model, as Libor, you said before, which is the business model.
Which is the only way to go to be sustainable. I can see that one of your panelists is there, Kira. Perhaps we can try to make a connection.
Hi, Felicity, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Excellent. So I'm very pleased that we have Felicity Osborne online. She is the coordinator for the infrastructure work in Shift2Rail, coming from Network Rail. Now, Felicity, one thing that's very important, I mean, you've heard all this discussion on system vision, but of course, to make the railway work, we also need to be pooling data, working with data across all of the users. How do you see this working in the future? I mean, is this something which is an issue for you in the UK at the moment, or have you made this work?
Certainly. So I think data has become absolutely imperative in terms of learning about our infrastructure, our assets, how they talk to one another, and how we use that to drive decision making, and ultimately how we make our railway fit for our customers and freight. So it's certainly a consideration in the UK, and working with our partners across Europe, it's a common interest and something that we have built as an integral part of the infrastructure programme. So we have three kind of technical demonstrators that are looking at different aspects of data. So data collection, data analytics and interfaces, decision support and lean working methods. And this will really drive other technologies and systems that will ultimately create better services for passengers. So it's all linked, but it's all driven by data.
Okay, but we have a lot of reluctance of data sharing, Keir.
Well, I mean, here I fear I have to turn back to Libor. I mean, as Felicity has said, and as I was indicating my introduction to her, we have huge amounts of data now available. If we can combine that data, learn from that data, we can run a very much more efficient railway. We can give much better real-time information to our customers, whether they're passengers or freight users. We can run the railway much more cheaply. But there is a reluctance, I'm not sure it's just in rail, I think there's a reluctance in many parts of industry to share that data. And I think what we're trying to do is work with everybody actually to show that there is much greater added value across the system if that data is properly shared. But there is a lot of reluctance. There are the big companies in particular who see this as proprietary, are concerned about the impact that sharing that data is going to have on their business. And so we're engaged in a process of confidence building to allow them to release that data. But I mean, Libor, it's your players. So,
but as you said, I mean, this is not unique to the rail sector because it's all about what you call, you know, how can we, I would say, demonstrate that there is a benefit in an added value of using the data in, I would say, much more shared environment. Because otherwise the companies, and this is a typical issue, is that they are afraid of them, you know, being a subject to internalization of the costs for gathering of the data, processing the data, and externalization of the benefits by other, you know, actors on the market that would just take a profit from what they have to work on, you know. So this is what we have to change in the first place. And that's why we always insist that, yes, let's use the data as widely as we can, but on a commercially fair and transparent principles.
Sure, but how can we work on the confidence in each other? Because we will need that one.
Yeah, but that's what I said. You know, that for me, for the basis is for having, you know, the transparent regulation and governance, and also the commercial principles let's say, embedded in
Must
that.
embedded and be
in that.
transparent.
Precisely. Otherwise, you cannot expect that a company, and it's not. When I had, the discussion with Eric Haltema, from the car industry, they had the very same concern. They have a lot of data in the cars,
Yes.
but just to give everything on the market, is that a solution? Because there is an additional aspect, and it's the responsibility for the data maintenance. I mean, if you operate certain subject, the technology component or the system, you have to be responsible also for the safety of the data that are inside. And if the data, for example, used for the automation or even the maintenance, you cannot simply give them out,
Of course, it will be difficult. There are a lot of barriers, but it is needed, this sharing of data.
I'm not protesting again. I'm just saying that we have to find the right way.
A solution and the right way, yes.
If I may.
Carlo, and then we go to
after
Mink.
we go to Mink, I think, but I would not use the word sharing data. I think we need to administer and manage data. And I think what you are asking for is how we can have a correct framework, a fair framework, into which we can manage data. Because if I follow your reasoning, Libor, absolutely. But if we are not careful, yes, we are looking at the risk inherent to share data, but how much money we are losing because we don't leverage the data.
Yes, but this is the balance we have to find.
Exactly.
Of course.
I mean, as we've indicated at the beginning, rail is a very complex system, so perhaps in rail more than many other industries, if we don't share that data properly, the system simply isn't going to deliver. So I think it's absolutely vital that we address this. And of course, we can find the right protocols to ensure that the data actually is what it appears to be.
It's vital, but it has to be done in the right way. I think one of your panelists is waiting.
I mean, Eric Mink is now online again, and I hope we can hear him properly this time. But Eric is actually in charge of mobility as a service in the Dutch Transport Ministry. So, of course, for mobility as a service to work, data sharing is absolutely vital. So how have you been addressing this in the Netherlands, Eric?
Hopefully I don't have the echo anymore.
No, we can hear you okay at the moment.
Is that correct?
Yes, that's okay.
Okay. We have a voluntary mass program on a national scale with voluntary data sharing. And sharing or managing data, in our opinion, will increase the cake for everybody. Especially when it comes to public transport. Because we need to be honest that public transport is not that efficient yet. In the Netherlands, the average occupancy rate is about 30%. So every additional customer is additional profit. So let's not worry about sharing, let's worry about efficiency and see whether efficiency of public transport can increase, because that would enhance sustainability, it would enhance profits, and it would enhance efficiency.
Okay, so that's clear. We have to talk about efficiency and not only about sharing, Keir.
Well, I mean, clearly, as we've said, efficiency is vital. So we need, first of all, through the demonstration work in Shift2Rail, but then in the real world to actually show the added value of sharing the data. But of course, there are still people who probably think they've got more value in keeping it close to themselves and others who very much want to benefit from it. So I think my question back to Eric would still be, what are the measures we should be looking at developing through Shift2Rail and then maybe through regulation, which will actually help support this sharing of data?
I think what is essential is to harmonize the data sharing as much as possible. We have seen that this will help a lot in creating an open ecosystem. We started out with defining a data string in order to be able to measure the effect of mass as a government. But we also harmonized a data sharing API between mass service providers and transport operators. And this makes the costs much lower and the benefits much higher, because it only takes one API to open up your market to mutual players.
Thanks for that. I'd like to
So
bring
standardizing and transparency are key.
Many thanks for that. I'd like to bring Yves Peralin, who I understand is also now available online. Yves, as I said, is from Thales, coordinating the Shift2Rail work on the whole ticketing area. And of course, data sharing is vital to make ticketing work. So in your work in IP4, how are you addressing this the question of data sharing? And of course, many of the players you're dealing with are those who currently own the data. So how are you overcoming their reluctance to give it up?
In IP4, data sharing is a little bit different. It said just now, we are dealing with a lot of modes. We need to find a way to connect all the data streams together. Instead of deciding to have a common data format.
Yves, I'm sorry, I think we're finding it very difficult to understand you, and I suspect that the audience outside are. So maybe we'll try again later. Very sorry for that. I mean, of course, the data issue is particularly important for bringing rail to the centre of a multimodal transport system. One thing maybe, if Eric's still online, we can discuss with him, is actually what else we have to do to make rail really strong at the centre of the system, and certainly Libor could also answer to this. I mean, rail is never going to be able to take you from door to door, so for rail to work, we have to integrate it with the other modes much more effectively. So again, what is it more that we need to do to achieve that integration? Eric, are you still with us to give your view as a mass coordinator?
Is Eric still there?
No, we have someone else on the screen.
One of the other panelists?
Yes, exactly. Do you hear us? Oh,
No, I don't think so. Perhaps we can go to Libor.
Libor?
Does he want to speak?
Well, we can't hear him.
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
Can you try again?
I am trying to speak.
Yes,
Oh,
we can
right.
hear you now.
Okay. I think there's a little delay. The screen and my. I'm George de Silva. I've been working in mobility and systems for quite a while. No. And well, I want to just
No, I don't think this is going to work. I don't think this is going to work. We are going to Libor.
Back to the railway in the multimodal perspective.
Yes.
I mean, we had quite, Claire Dupré. Yesterday we had an interesting discussion about the multimodal ticketing and the mass. So I can tell you, this was something that in 2.5 hours, how diverse the opinions have been, taking into the consideration the current experience and also the potential for the future development of this connectivity that could ideally be built on the rail as a backbone, but having door-to-door services using the other modes as well, because we never will be able to serve the customer, from door to door. Yes. So how can we connect that all together? And this discussion yesterday really has demonstrated that there are not only, various, I said, experiences with what can work in the regions, depending also on the cultural background, on the regional, I would say, expectations, but how to make that transfer to something that can work Europe-wide and connecting across the borders.
And what do you think about
and
it? How could we do that?
That will be a challenge, to be honest.
for
That will really
Europe
be a
as well.
challenge, yeah.
But don't forget, because I think this also would have been more or less, I believe, the intervention that Eve started to make was that effectively, from the technological point of view, the use of ontologies that we have introduced in the logic of IP4 for the interoperability framework would allow to connect different APIs without having to change the system and so on and so on. So I think there is a different component here that are playing together. From the technological point of view, I think we are quite advanced. Now the question is how we bring this technology inside an operational system.
Yes.
And this is not something that, and there are a lot of implications. We have the experience of the aviation sector when this happened, how much revenue was, or pricing was defined by digital company compared to those providing the service at the end, and which can be the impact. We have how we involve the payment system, like credit cards, like Apple Pay, like Google Pay, whatever is coming up now, and so on and so on. So there are a lot of factors that are intervening. From the technological point of view, I think we are almost there. If not there. We have also the FSM project that the railway community is bringing forward, is aligned with the interoperability framework. So there, all this is there. Now, and this is something that we are experiencing, is going back to the concept of capability, is the question is how we can transform, especially such type of advances and technologies that are touching at the heart of the key component of the system, because we're talking about revenues, fundamentally, okay, in a manner that we are bringing this technology inside the companies. And I think this is really where we have to do, I don't think we have anyone as an answer, but I think it should be really...
You should think about that one,
yes.
because that's the biggest challenge.
If you allow, because I fully agree, Carlo, we have a technology more or less in hand.
Yeah.
And
it's almost ready.
It's almost,
there.
I mean, it's ready or it's almost ready. But the point is, that's why coming back, to what we discussed yesterday, it's really a lot about the political will, and not, I mean, the central one, again, from the Brussels bubbles perspective, but the political will of the regions and the states, exactly.
Yes.
The culture, which plays really important, we would not believe, what are the influences coming from the cultural background that do direct that, and also the business interests.
Okay, and how could we tackle that hurdle? Is it something politics? what in your opinion, here?
I think we've also got to go back to, are we just reinventing the railway system as it was with a few bells and whistles? Or are we actually going to try and do something fundamentally different? And I actually think the answer should be the latter. That
otherwise there's no future.
Yeah,
that's the way to go.
There's no future, but also there are so many possibilities, I think, with automation in particular.
And people, I'm afraid, they will expect also that you use that possibilities as well.
So we've got to use that to build a completely different operational model and a new business model with that, and of course in the end to make this attractive.
Yeah, but we do agree on that. Who is going to tackle the hurdles?
Well, we have to do it collectively. I mean, that's why we're sitting here, that's why we spend a huge amount of time with Libor and his colleagues, and why some of my colleagues are reaching out all the time to the urban transport industry, etc. But of course, as Libor says, it's not only different industries, but it's culturally different in different parts of Europe. How this works is very different in very big cities with very strong urban transport operators, for example, to medium-sized and small cities. So it takes a lot of work aligning the interests. But I mean, fundamentally, as I say, I think if we can show at a European level and with some of our demonstration projects what could be done, then we create the momentum to make it happen.
I think that's a very right thing to say. You should show what this could mean, not only to the Brussels bubbles, as you called it, but also to the nation states. How do you want to do that?
Well, this is, at the moment, what we are trying to do is this is the week of the region, by the way. So yesterday we were with Libro, another event exactly about speaking about it. I think is that as much as we have European projects bringing together the actors, we need to the reverse process and go locally. And we are looking at the possibility to sign agreements. So for example, we have an agreement that is signed with the Basque region in Spain, and for example, SEIT is part of these overall discussions, because it's the way to bring back the discussion at local level, as Libor said, that
It's
regional
essential.
level
It's really
is
crucial.
essential.
This is really crucial.
But don't forget that it's not only for passenger, it's also for freight.
Freight also.
Yeah.
But you need these best practices then. You need ambassadors. You need those projects to show to the world, the Commission, the nation states, look at what we could do if you go on a regional basis.
Yes, but we need also to go with the idea to say, I don't want to have something different. This is we are really a specialist, if I may say so. What I've seen is that I can make simple example of discussion about batteries, in which some rail sector has asked to battery companies to develop batteries, and so we don't need square battery, we need a bit round battery because we want to put under the roof. And the battery industry said, can come back in 20 years because we need to satisfy how many billion cars in the world. And we have only square batteries, nothing to say. So I think there is a full set of aspects that are intervening. In the freight business, for me, one of the key issues we can see, and is going to how we manage data, how we manage information, is brake control at the borders. And I may understand there is a different regulation, but the brakes was working before. I hope it will work after. And the train may be stopped there for this type of reason. We have seen on the video before, during the pause, the manual brake test and the future digital brake test. So we need to, let's say, learn to accept or learn to take the maximum benefit for this develop, instead of every time reopening, they will say, my network is different, because this will not work.
You agree, Keir?
Well, I agree. And of course, this is a huge amount of the work we're doing, not just in innovation, but also on the regulatory side in Europe. I mean, the railways, for historic reasons, have had a tendency for each railway to invent its own set of rules, and having done that, decide that really anybody else's rules are simply unsafe. And what we need to do with all the new technologies is ensure that doesn't happen again. And of course, it easily can happen, because you have somebody do a project in one part of Europe, somebody do a different project in another part of Europe, and they just say, my project's best, let's go with it. So that's where Shift2Rail is so important in bringing people together, getting them to work together right from the word go, so that we don't get that divergence. Then, and of course, we talked about system architecture earlier, that's where it's vital that we have everybody around the table. We develop a common vision, we put that in the rules. The industry has a single set of products to develop, and it's much, much cheaper.
I can see that one of your panelists,
Norbert
Karl, is there to join us. Norbert, good morning, no, good afternoon almost. Good day to you. So can you hear us, and could you as well? So Keir.
Yeah, so Norbert is the from DB Cargo, so responsible in Shift2Rail for our freight program. You've heard a lot of discussion, or I hope you've heard a lot of discussion about the issue of access to data, and about also now this issue of coordination across borders. How are you dealing with this for freight? Because of course for freight it's absolutely vital that we are able to tell the end customer where their product's arriving, that we're able to coordinate with the trucks or whoever are taking the load on at the end of its journey. So how are you dealing with these issues in IP5?
Yes, I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
So what we have in IP5 is a unique vision of an asset control tower whereby we steer our fleet. I'm talking a bit slow because I can hear echo, sorry. But we steer our fleet on a European level based on actual real-time data, and at the same time we want to make this data available to our customers. So it's very, very clear that there's a big challenge in the data sharing, data cleansing, data handling, and Carlo, you said it right, data management. So for instance, we're having a big program here, which is condition-based maintenance inside IP5. I will just take this example because it's really alive and vital and really hits us in this moment. We have 1,400 locomotives sending data. They are part of our analytics cluster. And now we have a number of dashboards, a number of use cases that we're currently checking, which are delivering first value, and where we also need to make sure they will deliver value to other European countries, to other customers, and in a large customer base. So that's a big challenge. Yeah. So here we need to partner up. We need to understand what the customer needs. You talked about APIs. You talked about interfacing for booking, for billing. There are the customer interface, but we also have challenges between the partners in the community. So for cross-border transport, it's evident, but even if you just want to homologate one system or bring one system or one supplier to the track of another supplier, you need to make sure that the systems are talking and that these interfaces are open and clear and don't harm any sort of innovation competition. There shouldn't be any boundaries in the architecture.
Okay, Carlo, you want to react on that?
Because thank you, Norbert, for this, because effectively condition-based maintenance is one of the key aspects of IP5, together with the digital automatic coupler, together with hybridization, together with the automation, longer trains, but especially on the condition-based maintenance. I understood that this is really very well progressing inside DB Cargo. Now the question is how we can export, as you said, this model also in other operators in a manner that we benefit at European level of such important data with all the value they have, but especially you can communicate between yourself.
Yes, that's a true challenge. Of course, we're at the forefront of the development at DB Cargo. But yes, we need to exchange with our partners. We have SNCF Fred, we have other operators in Shift2Rail, which need to give their input to this development and demand what they need in terms of changes for their national application. So the exchange, collaboration in this field is crucial. Without this open discussion and the transparency of what we have in our hands, what data is here, we will not progress. And I think you've discussed about this in the digital age. It's about sharing the data, sharing the data. Yeah? Your product will not be valued because it's scarce, but the more it is exchanged, the better the digital products are. And that means bringing in new players, also integrating the whole supply chain. So we need to bring railways to the table and all the railway operators when we talk about the standardization of data handling.
We should bring others to the table, also the supply chain. That will be a challenge as well. Perhaps Kier, Carlo, I don't know.
Kier.
You're two gentlemen. Kier first, then Carlo.
Well, I mean, again, I think we're back to what we keep saying. There is huge added value for everybody if we do it right. So we have to demonstrate that added value, and where necessary, do some nudge through regulation. I mean, I think we're not going to get away from regulation because there are always players for whom the personal benefit, if you like, is greater.
It's always more important than the general benefits. Yes, Carlo.
You know, I don't come from the rail system, so I'm really humble when we talk about these type of things. I come from numbers. And why I say this? Because I think at the end is a problem also on how we share the revenue and the benefit from this. I think this is really
what I said. Yeah, already.
That's what you said.
Is this really
well,
the key point around it? So I think when is a simple example, and Eric mentioned before. If you go to the port of Rotterdam, I was told you have a ship that can contain maximum 45,000 container, 45% by truck, 45% by barges, 15% by train. Can you know how much are 20,000 container on trucks? 100 kilometers. Every ship of 45 is 100 kilometers on the highway. Here we need to offer what we can offer from rail to address it. Okay, yes. And this clearly is not because we take away the market. It's saturated the market. No. And as we have the target of 30 by 2030, is how we can look at this area where there is such saturation, and we can integrate this type of aspects.
You will need to integrate it because that's the solution. Otherwise, you will be stuck in traffic.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I can't add more because I mean that's back to the automation and capacity management. Because one of the reasons why we can't supply more containers, it's the capacity of the trucks that we operate. Yeah.
I can see that there are some questions of the audience. Does the issue of they're coming back to the data accessibility? Does the issue of data accessibility to provide an optimal transportation service ask also for legislating? I think so.
Well, as I said, I think we are going to have to. I mean, to some extent, in fact, we already have legislated. There is both within the rail-specific legislation, but also general legislation requiring certain kinds of data to be.
But you have to adapt it to each other, perhaps more.
Well, that's a separate issue. I mean, the question of making the data available is one thing, then the question of the technology to ensure that it actually can be used is another. Frankly, the latter question, I think, is easier. I mean, there are technological issues. But
easier than the first one.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work going on with it now. As Carlo was mentioning, we have new technologies to link up different data sets without having to build very complicated databases, for example. So that becomes easier, the kind of thing Google has done effectively. What is still hard is ensuring that the data is there. But also, as Libor was rightly mentioning earlier, I mean, having data available is only part of the issue. You do need to know how reliable that data is, how up to date it is, etc. So you need some checks and balances, some things to actually ensure responsibility for the data.
I can see that Jorge Vieira is with us again. Hi. Perhaps you could ask your question.
Yes, I'm coming back to the comment by Carlo on the interoperable framework. I think that this is a major Shift2Rail, and I'm surprised of hearing talking about the universal to link systems together, whereas the semantic approach that is proposed there is much more powerful and much more reliable for the future.
Jorge, I'm sorry.
I think that we are trying to
Jorge, this is not working. Jorge, this is not working. Perhaps you could use Slido. Then we can see your comments and your questions as well, and we take it in the panel discussion. So perhaps you could use Slido, because this is not going to work.
But I think Jorge has a correct point, because he said he is surprised to see this discussion going on. And I think from his point of view, I don't want to interpret his words, but I understand, because Jorge, like Eve from Thales or other companies, have invested in coming up with technology that can provide such a support on the data. And now the question is really the transition process. And this is really something that I think in Europe we have difficulties. If you compare Europe and the US in terms of research and innovation, there are no doubts we are much better. When we are going to the innovation process, we are stuck.
How come that we are stuck?
Because clearly, well, first of all, we don't have the same legal framework. It's completely different legal framework. But second is clearly the way that where we come from. We come from a complete different situation, and we need to make a transition. So, and this is really where we need to focus, I think, and we discussed before a bit with Eric about, for example, the funding of Connecting Euro facility for the future. I think we need to have a share of funding Connecting Euro facility that is going exactly in the direction of focusing on bringing technologies on the market and really to find the migration plan. I don't know if we can say we partition it or we have this, but because we have a lot of investment going in rail, okay, the question is that to do what? And I think this is really the strength.
Yes.
I mean, I think maybe we shouldn't beat ourselves up about the US too much on this one, actually. I mean, if you ever travelled on Amtrak or
yeah,
the New
it's
York
not so
subway,
nice to be on the trains there.
A lot less innovative
no,
than
it's not so nice. I agree as well.
Yeah.
But I mean, maybe it actually illustrates the problem, because, of course, very often we're dealing with publicly funded bodies, and at the local level, they're not always very sophisticated. So they're used to doing what they've always done. They can provide a subsidy to keep the service running, but they don't actually have enough people really to address what innovation could deliver. So they can't think the big thoughts and make something happen. And that's where we at the European level have really got to try and help them along with this. Now, I mean, as I said, it's different if you're looking at the very big operators, if you're looking at RATP in Paris or Transport for London. But if you're looking at a smaller city, they can't innovate. So we have to help.
Libor.
I mean, I can only agree what has been said. Just maybe back to this, the idea of really, promoting and supporting heavily the deployment of the innovative technologies. I mean, look, we have the first challenge. It's to deploy the ERTMS, for which we need, a big chunk of money. And obviously, you will always ask, what is the business model behind it? So is there a business case for the infrastructure manager? Is there a business case for the train operating companies? And when you find that you will have it, but in a 10 to 15 years period, And then, of course, you need to inject the money at the first place in order to make the breakthrough. And that should be the part of the consideration. And we have, had a number of the various considerations how to do it, how really to massively invest into the ERTMS in order to make this breakthrough and making this necessary switch or transition as fast, as quickly as we can. That's now a must, and that's the basic pillar of the interoperability or the
Everything
IT.
that
Exactly.
we want to do, we
exactly.
have to make that injections.
I see we have Felicity back online. Felicity, can you hear us?
Hi, yes, I can hear you.
I hope you've heard some of the discussion. How do you think we can help you be more innovative and get all this technology actually deployed much more rapidly on, in your case, Network Rail?
Well, for Network Rail, we've adopted an agile approach in some areas, and that's been really successful in terms of integrating technology at a fast pace. And I suppose if you compare that to Shift2Rail, the technology that we're developing has been well thought through and has been very futuristic, but it is slow. We do need to consider how we work at a fast pace. So I would be keen to consider how we adopt agile methodologies and how we incorporate innovation in an agile manner, and how we look at things like standards and technology instruction, processes, things like that can be streamlined more to ensure that we are introducing innovation at a faster rate. I mean, this year has been a fantastic example as to how quickly the rail industry can change and how we need to be able to adapt very quickly. So it is essential that we are considering things like agile methodologies to do that.
The UK has got, in a sense, the most fragmented railway in Europe, with Network Rail completely separate to all the train operators and very many different train operators. So how are you ensuring that actually you get alignment of the business interests between Network Rail and the operators?
So one of the things that the UK has been looking at is exploring putting passengers first and how we ensure that we are putting passengers at the forefront. And so Network Rail has been adapting their organisation to ensure that we are working very much closer with our operators.
I'm sorry,
and that we are delivering for our end customers.
No, you can go on, it's afterwards.
Okay. Sorry, no, continue.
So I think in terms of having a model there where we're not working through our operators, we're actually interacting closer with passengers and freight users, will ensure that we're more integrated as an industry.
Okay. I mean, one thing that's always concerned me is we do a huge amount of work on technology, but are we actually doing enough work in thinking on how much we could radically rethink what the railway service of the future looked like? I mean, this comes back to the discussions we were having on mobility as a service as well. I mean, should we still be looking to running trains which are sort of 200 plus meters long every 20 minutes, every half an hour in the future? Or could we use automation and modern signalling systems to run something much more like almost a pod system to make the service much more fluid, to allow perhaps people to go to many more different destinations? Is that too futuristic for the railway, or is that something we can actually build into our future plans?
No, certainly. I don't think we should put any barriers in place in terms of what's possible and how we look at transport. I think mobility as a service is almost a step towards that. But we do need to be considering what does the future of transport look like? How will people's behaviours change? Again, I've mentioned this last year as an example of how people's transportation behaviours have changed. And we need to, as an industry, we need to be able to adapt to that. We're starting to develop autonomous vehicles, how can we bring that into the rail industry?
I mean, Libor, the same question back to you. I see huge possibilities to really transform what rail does, but are your members looking at that? Is it at all realistic given the very long technological cycles we see in rail? And if we can't take advantage of that, can rail really survive?
I mean, we all rely on railways, so I would not, even put such a question here on the table today. No, obviously, the interest of all the companies, and thanks, by the way, to the European regulations, all the companies have to behave as the private enterprises, is to provide and to offer the attractive services to the customers. So they know very well that to be competitive on the market, they have to invest into the future evolution, the development, and the automation. Of course, then we can discuss particular questions, how do we work in the whole system hierarchy, because the difficulty is that with having that many actors, we still have to integrate them. So on one side, we have been disintegrating the system, but on the other hand, technology-wise, we have to integrate the system backwards in order to make it more efficient. Mm-hmm. And so we have to combine, slightly contradictory perspective into something which will be, again, more competitive, in the entire multimodal chain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we have Norbert from DB Cargo back online. I mean, Norbert, I know there's a panel on freight tomorrow morning, but in terms of automation in freight, I mean, we're developing digital automated couplers to make single wagon load, we hope, much more efficient. But what do you see the value actually of bringing automated train operation into freight? Is this something, again, which can allow you to recapture a lot more freight flows and therefore raise the modal share of rail freight as we hope?
Definitely. If I can answer this one, I think ATO or automation of rail freight has the power to be a game changer. Yeah, and there's of course a growth story in that because we do have a growth target, but on the other hand, it's creating more efficiency, robustness, punctuality. We're getting faster, greener, you name it. So there are a lot of benefits. Now, what we need to make sure is we have a common understanding of these automation. Because if we look at some of the suppliers, they understand an ATO module, which is just an ETCS-based autopilot, as the core of automation. But there's a lot more process automation required. Sometimes there are low-hanging fruit which we looked for too long. For instance, automated brake testing, automation in various of the system. So that is where really management. The beauty of automation takes place in the nodes of the system. Yeah, if you look at a P&G and how they store their goods, and you see a high degree of automation in the node. And I think that has to be tackled just as much as the main line.
Okay.
Yeah.
On the main line,
and this automation.
Yes.
Yes.
I think this is exactly. I think Norbert has brought inside the correct perspective. Automation is not only on the driver that when we look in Great Automation 4, automation is look at all the other subsystems. And if we look in the capabilities, exactly the logic of the capabilities to bring together all the subsystems to deliver this is going with localization, so satellite position for localization is going on the automation. We have some automation already in place in Czech Republic for years on legacy systems. We have the logic of moving block. We have the logic. So all this technology brought together, fundamentally powered by the capacity that we have today in supercomputing also, will allow us to manage in a different manner a complex system. But I go back, for me, is always the starting point is always the same. We need to have a clear business model. We need to have a clear concept of operation. We need to have a clear architecture that we share at European Union level and based on the national contribution, national idea, and to create an integrated system.
Okay. I'm going to ask for the last key takeaway for all of you for this panel. Libor.
I will do the same as the previous panel. I will take your last word. The integration of the system, so building the joint, overall architecture. Because it brings me back to what, we discussed a few seconds ago. We have to bring back, the interest of the various actors on the market, follow their business perspective, and integrate it into something which will be much more competitive. And it's a challenge to building such a new system.
It is.
It is a big challenge.
Yeah, I've understood that after those panel discussions. Kia, same question.
Well, I think there are two takeaways. I mean, on the question of integration, it's something I think everybody agrees we've got to do to work together on a system architecture. What we really need now is for everybody to come to this with an open mind and actually be prepared to perhaps throw away some of their past thinking so we can actually come to common solutions. Because if everybody says, yes, let's do it, but let's do it my way, it ain't going to work.
Yeah.
And then the other issue is data, which again, we've discussed a lot. And I mean, I think the clear takeaway is, again, in principle, everybody sees the value of doing it, but everybody is still terrified of the consequences.
Terrified,
so
yes.
I think we are going to have to do a bit of nudge at European level with legislation, carefully thought out legislation, to force some of these silos open. Because again, if we don't do that, we can see all the possibilities, but they will never happen.
Yes, that's a clear one.
But then the final thing is actually to really rethink what rail means in the future.
From the bottom, I've understood
from the bottom
you.
up, to come up with some much more radical, much more attractive ways of doing it.
Much more thinking, out-of-the-box thinking is needed to rebuild the rail sector. Thank you. Carlo?
The first one is simply that I see that the sector is converging towards an action, and I think is the most important aspect. The initiative they are taken in terms of international passenger transport, the initiative proposed by Germany on the transport Europe Express, I think, or Trans-Europe Express, something like this, I remember more the correct name, so on and so on, are clearly a sign of actions, and this is what we need, to bring it in motion to have an action in place. And the second one is that overall the rail system will benefit from better communication of what we have experienced this morning. Because we'll be seriously in trouble otherwise. Yeah. So this is something that is a lesson for everyone, but it shows that also I think when we talk about automation, digitalization, one of the key elements we need to keep in mind is the human-machine interface. Because this is always something that sometimes we forget, and we think about automation replacing the human being and so on and so on. I think on the contrary, we need to have the correct balance in these type of things. And this morning we experienced it. We had very good speakers that were able to intervene only a small part of the discussion. And I think it's a sign of capacity to interact from this point of view. Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you, Kier. Thank you, Libor. I leave you to leave the stage, and then I take the last.
Can we also thank our online
Yes,
panelists?
of course.
Many thanks to them.
Yeah, I wanted to do that as well. You are really, yeah, that's right. Thank you, all the panelists online, even when it wasn't that simple. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you also, the audience, for all the questions. Perhaps I let you to leave the stage, and Carlo, we make the last key takeaways. Perhaps we can stand here. Okay, Carlo. It was heavy, it was interesting, but it was heavy. We had some difficulties, but I learned a lot, I must say.
Yes, it was extremely interesting because effectively, although we didn't have all the panelists being able to express their full views, we had a clear, interesting point from Henrik about the commitment of the European Commission in rail and European policies, and also a strong push to us to deliver as we would like at the level of ambition. We had the key contribution from Kwan expressing the impact of Shift2Rail in a resource center and the key contribution to a program like Shift2Rail. We had Henri Poupard-Lafarge explaining their role in the vision of how, which are the expectations from Shift2Rail and the procedural program. And we had Libor that helped us throughout the morning, bringing in the insight of the rail operating community, the infrastructure manager, the railway undertaking, and also the connection with the urban interface that we have with UITP and Umberto. I think has been really a panel in which we have brought together the sector, and I think this is our role, is really to, and once again, to move things on.
That was very clear to me also. We have to bring all these members, all these partners together, because you can't do this alone. It's too much.
No. I think this is really the major change we want to do, and I think the progress we have achieved in the last 5 years, thank you to the sector, because this work can happen only if the sector is participating to it.
Okay, thank you very much. And to end, we have to keep up the spirit. We have to think in the future. How do you see that?
I'm always positive. It's my nature. I'm always looking at the future. I don't look at the past. And you know, one way to measure it, in my opinion, is KPIs.
KPIs,
numbers.
Yes.
And effectively, I can say that today we put online our KPIs model that shows all the work done by our IP coordinator, program managers, and the community at large. On now we are delivering the expectation that are fixed in our regulation. I think this is a really sign, not only to speak, we can speak a lot, but there are numbers showing the progress.
That's what really is done.
Yeah.
You had a very nice story for me before.
Yes,
From
I have a very
old
funny
man.
story.
I was laughing with it. Perhaps you could repeat
because
it.
effectively, when we are talking about the future, there is a famous entrepreneur. He turned 100 a couple of weeks ago in Bologna. He started from nothing. And he was asked by journalists, which are your projects? Do you have still projects?
At 100 years old.
At 100 years old. And the guy said, absolutely have projects. What do you think? But you know, my projects, I don't look tomorrow. I don't look in 5 years. I look at people of 2088 because I can shape their needs. I can provide today solution that will be able to answer their needs. And this is what we need to do in railway. We need to look at what we need to have or what we would like to have in the future.
Not in 5 years, but really
deliver
in the future.
today and start to deliver today, being capable to scale up the system. And there are plenty of sectors that have done it. Clearly, when you talk about a system, when you carry people, dangerous goods, you need to be extremely careful in what you do. So it has to be proof, safe, and so on and so on. But this is really the vision that we need to keep on.
And
Thank
that's a story of a 100-year-old. That's really a great story, ladies and gentlemen. Well, thank you very much. It was really a pleasure to be here today. Thank you, Carlo. It was a pleasure to have you as a co-host. Thanks also to all the panel members and moderators. I would like to ask your attention for the more than interesting webinar sessions that will continue also after lunch. As for me, it was really a pleasure to be with you this morning. Enjoy the rest of the day and the webinars with Leah, Judith, and Manuel from the Shift2Rail team. I'd love to see you back tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp. Bye.